Now, we're going to be switching gears for the remainder of the program and focusing on some inspiring examples of actual work being done to help promote civility through fostering better understanding of others. Our next presenter will be Professor Michael Birkel. Professor Birkel is a professor of religion at Earlham College in our neighboring state of Indiana, who the Buckeyes are apparently playing today. Don't hold it against him, he's a great guy. He is widely published, particularly on topics related to Quaker thought. His recent publication, though, is the book Quran in Conversation, in which he interviewed a diverse group of American Muslims who shared their views on particular aspects of their Holy Scripture, providing those who are not Muslim insight into how Muslims actually understand their religion and, equally important, the diversity of thought among members of this faith. The book has received glowing reviews and was ranked on Publishers Weekly's top list shortly after its publication a few years ago. It is also being hailed as a valuable tool to facilitate interfaith dialogue. We are so honored to have Professor Birkel with us today to talk about his book. But first, before I call Professor Birkel to the podium, I would like to share a short video put out by the Quaker community, in which Professor Birkel discusses his experiences of having these meaningful conversations with his Muslim neighbors. It is a beautiful video that I believe truly captures the essence of what we would like to recognize and celebrate today.
There is within Islam a sacred saying called a hadith, in which God is speaking, and God says, "I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known." This was one of the motivations of the act of creation itself. I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known. If that desire, that deep desire, is imprinted on the very fabric of the universe, then our coming to know one another across religious boundaries is a sacred task and a holy opportunity. We Quakers have a commitment, we call it a testimony, to truth-telling. And it was pretty obvious to me that not the whole truth was being told about Islam or about Muslims. In the media, we would hear about extremists who live far away and never hear about our Muslim neighbors who live here. And what do they think? So I traveled among Muslims who live from Boston to California, and I just had one question for them. Would you please choose a passage from your holy book and talk to me about it? And the result was a series of precious conversations, because what they brought to the conversation was their love for their faith, for God, and for the experience they had of encountering God's revelation through the Quran. One of my Muslim teachers told me, when I asked him, what is it like to read the Quran? And he said, it's this experience of overwhelming divine compassion. You feel yourself swept up into this divine presence, where you feel so loved that nothing else matters. Any other desires you had in the world just disappear. You are where you want to be. And at the same time, you feel this overwhelming sense of compassion for others. And he told me, if you don't feel that, you're not reading the Quran. I spoke with Muslims from many places that are within the spectrum of the Islamic community. I spoke to Sunnis, I spoke to Shiites, I spoke to Sufis, I spoke to men, I spoke to women, I spoke to people of many ethnic heritages. If there's one thing I learned, it is that whatever you think Islam is, it's wider than that. One imam, who was by 39 generations removed, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad himself, spoke to me and said that for him, one of the jewels of the Quran was this notion that you do not repel evil with evil. You drive away evil with goodness. And if you repel evil with good, then you find that the person whom you regarded as your enemy can become your friend. Another Muslim teacher taught me that according to the Quran, when we hear about good and evil, our task is not to divide the world into two teams. Here are the good guys, here are the bad guys. But rather, the inclination toward goodness and toward evil is found in every heart. And that is where the fundamental conflict resides. This to me sounded very close to the message of early Quakers. I believe that for a non-Muslim, encountering the Quran for the first time can be perplexing. You might imagine being parachuted down into the middle of the book of Jeremiah. Okay? There you land. You don't know the territory. Here are these prophetic utterances, which is how Muslims see the Quran. And in Jeremiah, they don't always have names attached to them. They're not in chronological order. They're not thematically arranged. And I believe the Quran can read like that to a newcomer. That's why I think it's valuable to read it in the company of persons who have been reading it their whole lives. What is it like to read someone else's scripture? I think it's quite possible that it can change you in ways that I can't predict for any reader, except to say that it will make your life richer. It will make your life better to know this, to encounter this. I am not a trained scholar of Islam. I did some preparation for this project, but mostly what I did was to go out and talk to my neighbors. And it changed my life. And so I would like to encourage anyone who's hearing these words to go out, cross religious boundaries, talk to their neighbors, because your life will be changed too.
Thank you for watching this Quaker Speak video. We release a new video every Thursday. We would like to thank Everence Financial for sponsoring this week's video. Everence
Life will be changed too.
Thank you for watching this Quaker Speak video. We release a new video every Thursday.
My dear friend, Professor Michael Birkel.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be your guest and to think together with you about building bridges, about civility, and about religious harmony. I want to express my appreciation to the Lahore Ahmadiyya Islamic Society and the way that it's been an important source of renewal and inspiration among Muslims around the world, as well as a center of education for non-Muslims like me. May your work continue to be a source of blessing for you and for all whom you serve. Well, my friend, our friend, Fazil Khan invited me to be with you today to talk about this project that I undertook to get to know my Muslim neighbors here in North America. One thing about a good video is that it's well edited, and the editor makes you sound smarter than you really are. So you've already heard the good stuff. I do want to report, however, that even though Fazil is up here working away on his computer, he's really not playing solitaire. I can verify that, just for those of you who are wondering. He's not checking Facebook. This little video, I don't want to go on too long about this, but this little video has been seen by a lot of people. There were like 900 comments on it. I don't encourage you to read them all. Some of them are from Christians telling me they're really worried about me. Some of them are many of them are from Muslims grateful to see a non-Muslim appreciate their faith with such sincerity. Well, that is a gift in my life. Some of the comments are debates among Muslims about, I quoted the wrong hadith, or it wasn't a good hadith, and that's for you to settle within your community. An outsider doesn't get to decide that. There was only one death threat in there, so that was good. That's my first. And I think it was from a non-Muslim, so just so that, we're talking about civility here. At any rate, back to the topic at hand. Fazil invited me to reflect on some questions about this project. And his first question for me was, what motivated me to do this? Well, because my own spiritual tradition, my own community, has shaped me to see my work as a teacher as a form of truth-telling and a form of peacemaking. I came to feel a kind of inner urgency about the need for me to learn about Islam so that I could then teach my students about it. As we've heard, there's just so much, not just misinformation, but intentional misrepresentation of Muslims. So I wanted to learn what Islam really is so that I could then help to convey that to students. That could be my own little scenario of activism in the world, perhaps. And so I read a lot of books. I gained some capacity in Arabic so that I could read the Quran. I had a very patient but rather incompetent teacher, which is to say I taught myself. So don't ask me to order in a Moroccan restaurant, okay? I don't know that kind of Arabic, I'm sorry, but I can read some of your holy book, and that is a wonderful thing. Because I began to teach about Islam with sympathy and respect, there were Muslim students who would take the class with me because they would know that their knowledge of Islam may be very deep, but it is very local. It can be as high as the heaven, but it's about as wide as a zip code sometimes, and which is wonderful because it's a very particular instantiation of Islam. But they knew that they would learn something about Islam in other parts of the world. Well, after some years of doing this, some Muslim students came to me and said, you should write something about Islam. And I explained to them, well, I'm not a Muslim and I'm not a trained scholar of Muslim. And then they looked at my bookshelf and they said, there are, a couple hundred books here on Islam. What do you mean you're not a scholar of Islam? I said, well, I'm not trained as a scholar. I don't have a PhD in that. And they said, well, but you explain our religion well and with great respect. And we need non-Muslims to do that because we don't always know how to explain ourselves to outsiders. So I sat with that idea for a time, and then it dawned on me, I'm still not a trained scholar of Islam. But I could go and talk to the people who were, and then I could report what I had learned. So as I mentioned in the video, I met with 25 Muslim leaders and scholars with the question of simply an invitation to talk to me about their holy book, and had a series of wonderful conversations that witnessed to the beauty and the power of the Quran as it comes to life within the Muslim community here in North America.
So Fazil asked me, talk about who did you meet with, and what did they teach me? What did I learn? I say some of that on the video. I will say one of the real treats was getting to know this significant young Muslim leader named Fazil Khan. We met, some people would say by chance, other people would say by providence, at the Islamic Society of North America. I went to a particular session hoping to go talk to one of the speakers who was going to be there on the panel to give him my elevator speech and see if he would be interested in talking to me, to be part of this project. Would he be one of my teachers? And as it turned out, I sat down next to Fazil and to Dr. Malik, and the speaker didn't show up for that event. However, I became acquainted with the two good people on my right from whom I learned about Islam. I had a wonderful conversation a couple months later with Fazil Khan, and we spoke on many topics together, from the prophethood of Muhammad to social justice to the notion of the hereafter. But the core of his message to me was that the purpose of human life is to identify, to understand, and to emulate the divine attributes. And the statement to me is so compelling because it embraces so much of just what it means to be a human being. It seems to me that to identify is to see, to perceive, to recognize, to discern, that is, to exercise sound judgment. All of these are fundamental human activities. And to understand is to embrace our capacity to know, and to know at a very deep level, to comprehend, to use our intellect. And then to emulate is to act, and therefore to engage our ethical capacities, to exercise the moral dimension of what it means to be human. And so this notion that the purpose of human life is to identify, understand, and emulate the attributes of God, this strikes me as not only as a beautiful description of Islam, but an invitation for everyone into the very heart of the spiritual life. I met with lots of other people. You heard from some of them on the video. I won't repeat them here. I'll mention Professor Zain Qasim from Claremont, California, who did not simply tell me, but showed me, by the way she carried herself through life, that this verse, that this ayah, everywhere you turn, there is the face of God. That verse can be the lens through which one can read not only the Quran itself, but read the whole world. A verse through which one can live one's whole life. Everywhere you turn, there is the face of God. What did I learn as a result of this work? I think I'm still discovering that, because the effects of a profound experience may unveil themselves gradually. I'll say more about that in a minute. But certainly one of the things I learned was that my image of the Muslim community changed. Certainly it widened, as I mentioned. I encountered what I would call diversity without adversity. And by that I mean, on numerous occasions I heard someone say, well, I respect this person as a fellow Muslim even though we differ on this point, or even though we have, I come to a different conclusion on this issue. One scholar, Emran al-Badawi, told me that among the classical scholars of Islam, diversity was treasured as a divine mercy. And this echoes the hadith that Dr. Malik mentioned earlier. On a maybe slightly more humorous note, this respect did not exclude giving advice. One fairly traditional imam, whom I came to know through several conversations, and who was supportive of my project to understand Islam throughout, once he asked me, he said, Michael, these other Muslims that you're talking to, do they have beards? And because we were already on friendly terms, I could respond, only the men. Because I was privileged to meet not only with men from the Muslim community, but also women who were religious scholars and leaders. As a result of my encounters with the Muslims in this book, I now read the Quran differently. I read the Quran in the company of these people who became my Muslim teachers. I feel their presence in the room as I open your holy book. Finally, in terms of what did I learn, I learned, in addition to the power and beauty of the Quran itself, I think the other most memorable experience was being a guest in the Muslim community. Hospitality and generosity are highly prized among Muslims, and I experienced the depth of those virtues as I am experiencing them here today in your midst. All of the conversations that I had were memorable. Some of them felt like the start of friendships that will endure for a long time. I'm hopeful that my little book might play some part in offering an alternative to what is often seen in the media or other places today in terms of how you and your faith are portrayed. And I'm very grateful to the many Muslims who made it possible for me to pursue this learning by opening not only their Quran, but also their spirit and their lives to me. So Fazil asked me to say a few words about the impact of this work. You expect me to be humble and talk about the impact of my work? How can I do both those things? I'm not sure. But I will say this. Numerous Muslims have expressed gratitude to me for this portrait of their community. I've been treated with respect by Muslims in various settings. This brings me joy because it suggests that the Islam that they see represented in the book is one that they recognize, that they see that it is their faith and not, I did not distort it. And that brings me great joy. Readers of the book and now viewers of this little video have contacted me. People I don't know, people from Palestine to British Columbia have found my email and expressed goodwill, and I'm very grateful for that. It makes me hopeful that the book is doing some good. It does get used in educational settings, from congregations to universities to Christian theological seminaries. I get invited occasionally to speak at places and that are, shall I say, at different locations along the spectrum that is religion in North America. I'll give you an example. I have spoken at the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Church to Notre Dame and St. Mary's College of South Bend, Indiana. And that's a little religious diversity. Christians in the crowd at least get that one. This project is still having its effects on me. The book grows out of conversations where my role was chiefly to listen and to learn rather than to respond very much. And I would say, and that was appropriate, that was clearly my goal. But as a result of this project, I still remain very keenly interested in the Quran. I may begin another project, and I would invite your thoughts, if you have any. Find me at whatever table later if you think this is a good idea, or tell me if you think it's a bad idea. And that is, I would like to explore more fully what it might mean to be a guest of the Quran, to read it not simply for information and study, but with the anticipation of the possibility of a spiritual experience. Now, I have to say some Christians would not approve of this. I would have to say, I think that some Muslims might approve of it, but then be disappointed if I do not convert, which is not my expectation. So the risk of pursuing this project is that rather than bringing groups together, I may offend them both. However, I feel drawn to this, and I'm exploring that possibility. Just as in my project that led to the book Quran and Conversation, the Quran became the catalyst for getting to know my Muslim neighbors. Now, my relationships with Muslims is drawing me more deeply into the Quran. Now, in religious communities, some people feel that they cannot travel to the boundaries. They have to stay at the center of their community where they feel safe. Some people feel called to travel to the borders in order to meet the neighbors. Others, perhaps, pass through the gate, not to join another religion, but to be their guest for a time in order to come to a deeper understanding that they can then bring back to their home community in order to suggest other ways that we might enter more fully into interfaith understanding. It seems to me that even if we agree that we worship the same God, it can be unsettling for some people to know that their soul's beloved has other names and other lovers. It can feel like we no longer know what to say about God, that there are no words that are adequate, or perhaps there are too many words, because the particularities of devotion in each community accumulate as you come to know them. The Quran itself talks about if the oceans were ink, there would be not enough to say what needs to be said. But we try to find ways to, even given the limitations of language, when talking about religion, which is kind of stretching the very boundaries of what language can do, we try to find ways to speak with as much clarity as we can. And here I remember a 4th century non-Christian named Symmachus, who urged toleration for his religious heritage in the face of the early Christian empire, with a famous utterance that surely by one path alone it is not possible to arrive at so great a mystery. Surely by one path alone it is not possible to arrive at so great a mystery. Well, is it all this same grand mystery toward which we're striving to seek a path? I think, to be fully honest, the fact that it is a mystery beyond the powers of human utterance compels me to admit I can't be really sure that I know. And some people conclude that God, this is the title of a book, that God is not one. Some people conclude that the world's religions are more dissimilar than similar. However, for me, the power of mutual recognition suggests that it may just be the same mystery that beckons us all. And here I remember a moment when a Muslim said to me at another convention, he said to me, "I can see your nur," the Arabic word for light. Muslim spirituality speaks of an inward nur, an inward light, a manifestation of divine presence. That person who said that to me, I think his light, his nur, beheld my light in mutual recognition, overcoming the distance of boundaries between our communities of faith. And my experiences among these generous Muslims gives me, within me, gives rise to a desire to continue and deepen that dialogue, that engagement, that relationship, to perceive that beauty and that light, that nur, and to be further transformed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Birkel. I'll just add that in this Quran and Conversation project, when I met with Professor Birkel, I honestly think that I learned more from his compassionate listening than he may have from my spoken word. It's a very unique skill that not too many people have, but it made a lasting impression on me.